And don't worry, I'm going to see if I can different Wi-Fi.
Okay. Yeah, there's a little delay.
Cool.
Do whatever you need to.
That should be better now. Okay.
You want me to let everybody in?
Yeah, why don't you admit everyone and start with the video and then we'll go for it.
Sure.
Thanks, Connor.
Connectra creates opportunities for people living with disabilities by providing information, resources, and programming geared towards greater inclusion and quality.
It's running, but it's not running.
It was running for us.
It was running, yeah. My screen, it just didn't run.
It was running.
Okay.
I'm gonna try it again.
Of life. Check out some of the programs we offer through our online learning platform, Connect Together, including our Service Mondays, where we highlight a local organization or initiative, Wednesday Chair Yoga with Bobby Seal-Kobiski, Thursday Adapted Fitness with Megan Williamson, Friday Rotating Dance Classes hosted by Janice Lawrence and Joanne Cuff, and other initiatives, including presentations by the Disabled Independent Gardeners Association's Growable program, and our Perspective series. Check out our updated programs calendar on our website, connectra.org, or find us on Facebook at Connectra Society.
Yeah, you guys can start.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Emily, your Connectra Program Coordinator. And this is our Perspective series on navigating exercise and movement with chronic illness. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the Perspective series. It's something we started a couple years ago. We have only offered it online so far, but we've covered topics such as parenting with a disability, navigating friendships with a disability, a myriad of different things. And then we upload any resources mentioned onto our website. And yeah, they're always just sort of organic, free-flowing conversations. I have some questions to start us off, but if you're in the Zoom room with us, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask a question when the time is right, or if you don't want to speak, you can put it in the chat and I will ask it for you. But yeah, we're all just here to talk to each other and learn a little bit more about navigating exercise and movement with a chronic illness. If you require closed captioning, make sure to enable them in Zoom and they should be running. And then I just want to let everyone know that this is being live streamed as well to Facebook and our YouTube channels where it will live. So you are completely up to you if you want to have your video on or off. All right, I'm going to introduce our panelists. And then Kazar, I think you can stop sharing your screen. If you could stop doing that, that would work out. Okay, so we have two panelists today. Our first is Zoe McKenzie coming to us from Australia, where it's 5 a.m. there. So Zoe is a physiotherapist, clinical Pilates instructor, and personal trainer with over 10 years of experience. She specializes in working with clients with chronic health conditions, helping individuals work with their bodies and understanding fatigue and pain physiology. Zoe has a unique perspective due to her own experiences with her health, which inspired her to launch her company, Actively Autoimmune. This is an online-based service helping clients worldwide through coaching services, Pilates, and her educational online content. Zoe, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think that sums me up perfectly. But yeah, that's what I kind of specialize in doing. And this is my favorite topic to talk about. So we'll have to make sure I limit myself to the hour.
Yes, it will fly by, but we're excited to hear all the knowledge. Awesome. And then we have Malerie Golgan. Malerie is acclaimed for mastering themes and overhauling the outdated approach to accessible yoga. She demystifies the art of tangible theming, radically simplifies accessibility, and coaches both new and seasoned yoga teachers, ready to alleviate the stressful expectations of consistently materializing inspiration or becoming an anatomical expert. I like this. As a disabled and chronically ill teacher who received her bachelor's in exercise and health science, led years of 200-hour teacher training, and taught creative vinyasa for nearly a decade before becoming ill. The lens she enables teachers to gaze through is dynamic, insightful, and informed by her own lived experience. Welcome, Malerie. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, awesome. Well, I would love to start the discussion off because it was mentioned in both of your bios about your own health journeys and sort of what you feel comfortable sharing and how it kind of relates to this space. So Zoe, do you want to start us off with that?
Yeah. So I was always kind of quite sporty and loved sport and exercise growing up, dance, swam. Had a few signs early on that there was something going on. But I had like pulled banana legs in ballet and used to sort of lose my vision and pass out when running. And I thought that was all very normal. Until I was sort of 12, 13, had my first of injuries and got diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I had to really reframe, obviously, a lot of what movement looked like for me then. I was in a wheelchair for several years and had to sort of relearn how to walk again. I lost a lot of muscle strength. So kind of built myself back up from there, navigating this new kind of way of working with my body. Over the years, it sort of felt like I gathered new diagnoses every year or so. So I then got like more gut and bladder involvement, numerous injuries, chronic migraine. I got diagnosed with POTS, which is like a autonomic nervous system disorder. So each time I kind of had a new challenge, I had to learn how to work with my body again and find this way of trying to stay as strong as I could while also navigating the usual challenges of being a teenager and trying to, at that point, I had decided I want to be a physiotherapist because I thought that would be, at that point, doctors hadn't helped me much, but physios had. That was my view on what I thought was helpful. And so I decided qualified to be a physio. Qualified and just about managed. And then a few years after qualifying, I got diagnosed then with lupus, an autoimmune condition. And that was really something that changed my whole mindset around exercise and working my body again, because I really had to stop. I think I'd got used to pushing a lot, kind of a bit more in survival mode, like must keep going, must stay strong, which is important for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and also deconditioning, trying to prevent that. But the way I was doing it wasn't necessarily that great for my body. And lupus really put a big stop to how I kind of worked at that point. And so then I had to really, again, reframe what exercise could be and look like for me. And I was off work I couldn't work for a number of years. I was really unwell from that. And that's kind of when I started my company, because I felt like at the time I felt super uninspired by what I was seeing on social media. There was no other accounts like what I started at the time when I did so. And I felt really frustrated that there was, everything was really uninspiring. And I thought there must be others out there that perhaps feel the same as I do, that they know they want to exercise, they want to move and help their bodies, but they didn't know how to actually do that. And that's kind of how I started, just sharing my own journey. And then that's turned into now me myself helping people around the world being able to do the same. So that's kind of a bit of my journey through how I've learned with my health and also how that's ended up with doing what I'm doing now.
Wow, thank you for sharing. Yeah, that's quite the journey and a lot of readjusting along the way, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like always just learning of how to work with my body rather than against it. And that's kind of my main, I guess, ethos when working with other people too, is getting, to do that. And that's taken, over 15 years longer.
Yeah. Okay, well, I can't wait to dive into some tips and tricks that you have for that later. Malerie, I would love to hear a little bit more about your health journey and how you ended up in this space.
Yeah, so everything was really unclear in the start. I got really sick with a virus and they didn't know what it was. And I had literally like a migraine for an entire year. I would have like 1 or 2 days without a migraine. And then like I would have stretches like 11 days long. And nothing would work. None of the like traditional migraine medicines, anything like that, were doing anything. And then I just took it upon myself and started taking CBD at a really high dose. And eventually it went away. And then I felt good-ish for like a year. And then I just all of a sudden, like I had noticed a little bit of extra joint pain that really had no like reason that it should have hurt really. And so I was like, okay, let's just go get checked out. And I wasn't diagnosed for a while. And during that time, I spent like 2 years like in bed. It got so bad just with my fatigue. I slept like almost all day, nearly every day. I woke up to eat and then I went back to bed. And obviously like had to stop working. But in the beginning, even I would like sleep all day so I could go teach one yoga class. And then I'd come back home and I'd sleep for the rest of the day. And the symptoms just kind of kept piling on and accumulating. But my biggest one that I've dealt with, especially in terms with managing movement, is definitely my joint pain and just extreme fatigue. And then eventually I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome and chronic Epstein-Barr virus. And worse, I'm literally still going through tests right now. I feel like this is something that just never really quits with chronic illness. And is something that I've wanted to pursue a little bit more just because fibromyalgia, which is like my main diagnosis for my symptoms, is a rule out diagnosis. So I just want to have more testing and see what's going on. But, you know, every single one comes back fine, normal. And then when I was in the worst of it, I really wasn't practicing at all, which was so different because I was used to practicing like every single day before. Yoga was like my entire life. I taught like 12 classes a week and managed the teachers at the studio and led teacher trainings and all of the things studio life. And I got really angry and frustrated because I felt like this community that I was a part of for so long had no space for me because I couldn't find any resources dedicated to yoga, specifically on like how to make things more accessible. And at the time, the most accessible thing I really knew was like, okay, I'm going to try chair yoga and, you know, would guide that for myself. And honestly, I'm like, it makes me so sad that that is the thing that yoga teachers and students oftentimes see as the level of accessibility that's offered, because that is so inaccessible to me. It makes my joint pain tremendously worse. So I practice all seated and lying down. I occasionally do kneeling. If I do a standing pose, it's like one, like I'll do it just to like, you know, engage my legs and to, you know, practice balance, which is really important because I'm falling over all the time. So my practice is tremendously different. And now at this point, I'm going to take a sip of water. And also, I'm just going to go ahead and mention now that if you see me moving around a lot in my seat, it's because of joint pain and just trying to like reposition.
Totally. What kind of space are you in, by the way?
It's our loft.
It's a loft. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Beautiful.
So now I'm focused a lot on teaching others with chronic illness, but not even really movement, because there's actually so much benefit that's been proven with like the neuroscience of yoga in just doing restorative yoga where you're just all propped up and laying down and you don't move, or just meditations and literally playing them as you're trying to go to sleep, you know, like not having to carve out extra time or do anything different, because that's overwhelming to think of when everything is going on. And another big focus that I've really tried to amplify is coaching teachers on accessibility, because I have such a history of teaching teachers already. And to me, that was just, I thought, what is the biggest way that I can make an impact? And I can only teach so many students. I can only teach, so many privates, and every teacher I teach is going to go out there and impact like hundreds and hundreds of students. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, that's super cool, seeing that there's a space that's obviously needing to be filled in learning, different accessibility techniques when it comes to teaching and guiding yoga. And so, yeah, that's really awesome that you're now helping nurture that space so other people will be able to have a better idea of how they might be able to make something more accessible to somebody with chronic pain. It came up a couple times. I know diagnoses is like, some people with chronic illness go their whole lives without ever getting diagnosed. Or as Zoe, you kind of talked about getting diagnosed with, different things along the way, and then you have to sort of shift and move. And I imagine it can be completely frustrating and also sometimes feel like daunting and a little bit, not hopeful. So can we just talk about how sort of movement and fitness has impacted your mental health and some of the things that come along with, living with chronic pain or illness that you don't always know how to navigate, and sometimes your body is not in your control?
Yeah, well, I think that's linking a little bit to your first part of the question about diagnosis. I think it's often the hardest part is when you don't feel you understand your body. So when something starts to go wrong, or perhaps it's always been a bit wrong, but you have to always adapt, and you don't fully understand why, and you don't have any clear diagnosis, or you're trying to be on that path to understand your body. And that's when the medical world, if they, can't give you the answers that perhaps you're looking for, I think that's really hard when trying to then navigate movement, because often we like to have a clear, okay, this is what's happening in my body, I understand that, and therefore I can adapt it by doing this and this. So I think for those that are on that diagnosis journey, or still not having a clear diagnosis, that becomes really hard, because a lot of what I try and do with my clients and myself is, educate, understand my body the best I can. I feel like the more we try and understand why our bodies act in the way it does, we can meet it more from a place of compassion, rather than thinking like we're blaming it for not being able to keep up or do what you want it to do. And then we can also then, like you said, learn how to work with it and support it through movement, because we kind of understand why it's finding a certain thing hard, so we then know how to adapt it. And also very much try to be in tune with our bodies as best we can in terms of whatever symptoms we have. So for many, obviously the biggest symptoms can be kind of fatigue and pain of some sort. And they're two things that are really hard to work with when navigating exercise. I think fatigue especially is probably in some ways harder than pain. I'm probably going to, people disagree, but I remember doing a poll on Instagram once, and people did say that fatigue's hard because it really affects their ability to feel motivated to get on the mat. If you're waiting to feel exhausted all the time, you're never going to have that, oh, you know what, I really fancy doing something more that could make me potentially more tired. Like, it's really hard to get that initial feeling like, and also then knowing what to do. Obviously, those living with chronic fatigue syndrome and conditions similar to that have an even more of a challenge with that, in terms of knowing when it's actually even safe to add in exercise and movement. But also to anyone living with fatigue, that balance between doing, the right amount, or theoretically what's the right amount, to doing too much can be such a fine line and hard to judge when they just feel exhausted all the time. So it makes it really hard to know what's normal, what's not normal, how far to push, when to rest. Like, it just kind of all those natural cues that someone living without those symptoms doesn't have. We kind of can't just judge on, well, I feel good today, I'm going to exercise. There's so much more to it that makes it hard to make those decisions and make sure we're perhaps trying to get that balance right to what helps our body. And same with pain. Again, pain is going to disrupt what we normally would cue. We can't often just go, I'll wait till my pain eases, I'll wait till I feel better. Sometimes our normal might be that we do exercise with pain, and then it's okay, what for me is my line of what's my baseline pain, what's too much pain, and how to adjust it depending on what your body's telling in that moment. So again, people often think, well, I've got to ignore all my pain to exercise. And it's like, well, no, you still have to listen to your body. But I also understand that's hard when your body perhaps is constantly telling you, I'm hurting. And it's really hard, again, to listen to those cues in your body, and find, again, that balance between, navigating and finding a way to work with your pain, but then not just ignoring your body and pushing it to the extremes all the time. So I think, personally, it's what I find hard still myself after all these years, is that walking that kind of balance between everything of listening to my body and moving it in a way that's kind of right for it in that moment, knowing as well that things fluctuate all the time, which is, again, the challenge of chronic illness and disability, is the nature that it can change, and that we have to be constantly adapting. We might find like, okay, this is what I can do today with my levels of pain and fatigue, and then the next day that may look different. And as much as we try to perhaps smooth out those fluctuations, we're not in that awful sort of boom bust pattern of doing way too much then nothing at all. It is also the nature of our bodies, and often many conditions, that things are going to change, but other factors that are out of our control completely. And it's then knowing how to adjust to that, to kind of, again, listen and being in tune with your body.
My gosh, yes. I was like, so much wonderful content in there that I just, if I can speak a little bit to. So I think that, especially like not having a diagnosis, well, one, I mean, that's just not accessible to everyone. The just sheer cost of tests, is absurd, and they never end. And so I think that having this, the movement and exercise world is so predominantly viewed from the able-bodied lens. And I think when people become ill and they aren't yet diagnosed, they still view any type of movement or exercise through the able-bodied lens. I think it's kind of hard not to when that's all you see. And so they feel like in order to move or exercise, it has to be the things that they used to do or that other people are doing. And I think that's why it's such a resistance to, or just an exclusion of, doing things totally lying down. I can't tell you how just tired and strong I feel from doing so many things lying down or seated. And I wish that people knew that, and felt empowered to just play around and realize that exercise or just movement and connecting to your body in that way isn't a formula that's pre-written and doesn't look like push-ups or whatever your mind goes to. It is any movement. I just remember during the bed bound time, I was laying on the floor and I just reached my arms up to the sky and just lowered them and just was doing this. And I think I did 8 and my arms were so done. I was just oh my gosh, okay, this thing is so simple. It was accessible. I could do it lying down in bed. I didn't feel like it was pulling that much more out of me. And it made me enjoy moving my body when it had become so just not wanting to do that at all. And I think you also have to reframe why you are moving, because whether we consciously think about it or not, I think many of us move because it makes us feel good in some way. And maybe it makes us feel strong. Maybe it makes us feel relaxed and stretched and open or energized or whatever it is. And I got to a point where every time I would do a yoga practice, I would be so disappointed at the end because it would just, everything hurt, and I was like, okay, I need to reframe this in my mind and figure out why I'm actually moving, because I don't want to be disappointed every time I move my body. That's not a pattern I want to continue to be in. And it was odd because I didn't even have that realization, which maybe seems silly now, but I didn't think, oh, I do yoga because it makes me feel good. I don't know. And then I realized, and my purpose now with movement is I do it because I'm taking care of myself. I'm doing something good for my body, and that's not always going to feel good. And obviously there's a line and we need to be really conscious of that. But I know that moving and exercising and doing yoga isn't going to feel like what it used to. And I need to let that kind of attachment to how it used to feel go in order to actually enjoy the experience and continue to explore it and evolve it. I'm going to take a sip of water and I have something else.
I think that reframing, I'll jump in while you're sipping water. I think that reframing is so key, because I think it's reframing it from a lot of what, like you said before, about what kind of society labels exercise as a lot of what you think you used to be able to do. Perhaps you're letting go of what you think you should be able to do. We often have all these rules in our head of what movement has to look like, or how much movement you have to do for it to count. But like you said, any movement counts, all movement counts. I talk about functional movement as in walking from one place to the other, or getting dressed in the morning, that counts. Lying in your bed, sitting on a chair, anything counts. But we often have a definition that perhaps it looks like it's got to be a certain level or intensity for it to somehow count. So actually the first thing I often do is, like you said, start by reframing what can movement look like for you, and try and take away some of those beliefs that are actually limiting us in our options of how we're choosing to use movement or add movement back into our lives. So yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And I think another thing that's really important when people are just starting that journey is knowing that your end range of motion, your end range of movement isn't usually a really nourishing or beneficial place, but it's where we instinctively go. And that can leave us really at a disadvantage for worsening our pain. And so I always say, like, do 50% of what you can do. Like, if you can move and like be okay for 10 minutes, do 5. If you could bring your leg this far to you, bring it only halfway. And I think that's just, it's so hard to get your mind to do that and stop. But it's like, even 25% of what you can do, that's great. Like, that feels like a really safe place for me if I'm ever, having maybe more pain, but I want to do something. I feel safe doing 25% of what I could do. And as far as this goes for teachers coming in and being able to help others, you're not going to know every diagnosis. You're not going to know every symptom. And I don't think you have to. Obviously, it's a wonderful advantage to have someone who's very, very informed about this. But I think that one of the simplest ways we can make things accessible is to just ask the student what movements hurt. That's going to inform you about so much. It's going to inform you about what you can skip. It's going to inform you about how you can create a sequence for this person that is going to be much more suitable, and lets you get so creative. So
working within people's different limitations, which are very, very day to day with chronic illness and pain. I think a lot of that were really good tips, like knowing that you can go this far and maybe keeping it in a safer range so that you feel like you could get up and give 25% again tomorrow, as opposed to maybe not being able to do anything. And yeah, I think that it's really interesting hearing that the foundation is sort of the same when Zoe was saying you still want to listen to your body, but maybe you have to decide where your baseline is. Because if you are constantly in pain, that's something that you have to decide for yourself. Tiffany in the chat also said it's also challenging when medical professionals are recommending movement and exercise, but don't offer realistic options or appropriate limitations. And then they label those patients as non-compliant. I'm sure without guidance, it can seem, unfathomable to start moving when you're like, I am so tired and I am in pain all the time. How do you expect me to get up and do this? So what are some bits of advice, or how do you get clients that you work with to sort of start the journey, look at the journey as, something that they can integrate into their everyday life when it's really daunting? Any tips on that?
Yeah, so I kind of it's about finding your baseline first. So Actually, first of all, that's finding your why. So like you've already said, is saying like, what is your why for movement? You're already feeling kind of rubbish right now. What can movement bring for you, and sort of focusing on that. Then finding your current baseline of what you're able to do. So there's lots of methods I use to kind of help people navigate that, because that's quite difficult. Whether it's usable hours per day, or whether it's using various energy sort of ideas about how they classify what energy they have, or what their baseline pain is, all that kind of thing. But understanding what their functional capacity is. It's also looking at what you already have to do. So sometimes I joke about that, if we only had to focus on our exercise regime and not have to worry about any other commitments or things we have to do, then it'd be much easier. But we have to live our lives, and we have to be able to, whether it's work or look after ourselves or chores, we have to balance all our activity. So we have to kind of make sure when we're adding in exercise that we're doing that in a way that we can still manage everything else we need to. It's not going to rock the boat so much that we then end up being stuck in bed for days after and can't do anything else. It should be able to fit into everything else you're trying to achieve already. I kind of talk about this idea of an activity cup. So say here's your cup of water, and everything you do goes into your activity cup, from getting dressed in the morning to making food to doing any work or studying, looking after anyone else you have to. Everything goes in there, including movement. If our cup's already really, really full from everything else we're doing, and then we try and add exercise on top of that, it's likely we're pushing it too far and it's going to overspill. And that way movement's going to be really hard to find a consistent routine that's going to work for you. So sometimes we have to look what else is going in our cup, and anything else we can readjust to sort of help create a little bit more space for movement. And then also find that dose of movement that's enough to go in our cup that again is going to fit in with everything else and not tip it over. So it's a bit of a balance of looking at all our activity. So once you've kind of found your baseline level of what's kind of right for you, what we think would be good to add in, then it's about creating a sustainable routine as much as possible, given that we said earlier about this fluctuating often symptoms and different days. But the ideal question I often ask people is, what is repeatable to you? So if you're doing something, for example, your exercise in bed you were doing, and that's something you can do day in, day out, and it's not going to make you feel worse, it's not going to make you stop doing everything else you need to do, then that's repeatable, then great. If you could do that one day, but then would need a 3 or 4 days recovery after that before you could then do that again, that's probably too much for you in that moment. So although sometimes we can choose to push and do more, the idea that when we're creating some kind of way to add in exercise on a regular basis, which is much more beneficial if we can get that consistency in, is to find something that is the right level for you. And like you said as well, the idea to bring that level all the way down to something that is less than your max. You're not pushing your max every day. That's more likely to be kind of able to be sustainable and more consistent with it. So they're kind of my first things about trying to find that right dose almost in terms of movement. Start super low and build up really slowly. So always start. People, I think, often living with any kind of disability or chronic illness, we tend to be quite stubborn and be pushing quite a lot, and we tend to push our bodies a lot. And so a lot of the time I tell people to do way less than they think they can do, because people tend to think, oh yeah, I can definitely manage this, and then end up doing too much too soon and kind of crashing. So I often get them to really think realistically with what their body can manage, and start off even smaller than that, and then you can kind of build up. And I kind of find if you do that slowly and gradually, it's much more likely to be successful in the long term. And like I said, that consistency is what's the biggest difference. It doesn't matter how intense or what you're managing to do. The main thing is you can do the same thing little and often, and kind of build up that way.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact wordage you used, but it basically just reminded me, brain fog. Let's circle around and maybe it'll come back to me.
It'll pop up again.
Totally. And one of the things that you were talking about, Zoe, about your activity cup, do you try and factor into, what fills that cup up in terms of the things that you get back from exercise? And
yeah, so sometimes I kind of like the idea that some things can take things out of a cup, as in like give us space to add more things in. So that's when things like rest and different types of rest and what we need to kind of help with our cup, things that we enjoy, and also like giving yourself that kind of space in your cup, like you said, to pick things. Sometimes you might choose to do more than perhaps your body can handle. Perhaps you might have a bit of payback symptoms afterwards, but because we're going to choose that because we kind of want to. And that's a luxury when we have that choice. Often when we are particularly restricted in what we can do because of our health or what's going on for us, our choices are really limited. And so I like when movement can give back that choice. And okay, sometimes we might misjudge our levels, but we did that just because we wanted to and enjoy it. So I think, yeah, definitely joy and finding the joy in what you can do is super important. In terms of movement, it's not just like this negative thing we must still have to do because that's what the medical world has said, you must be exercising, but reconnecting it for a way that you want to, that can add to you rather than just constantly take away. So and then I think obviously movement and exercise can make our cup potentially bigger in some cases. So the more we do and get stronger, the more capacity we perhaps have in our cup as well. So I can talk about the cup analogy for a long time, but you can take it very far. But I think it's a nice visual to kind of remind everyone that, again, all activity counts and we have to factor everything in. Often exercise gets a lot of the blame for perhaps why people's symptoms are worse, but then, they didn't realize they were walking 5K steps just doing housework or something, or something that takes up a lot of energy. So I think it's looking at everything you can perhaps do. Someone asked how full your cup is before exercise as well. Now that's a tricky one because that's again about understanding your baseline before adding in movement and then what movement will be. So ideally we don't want to be running our cup to its maximum potential all the time because that's likely to just kind of end up overspilling a lot. So you want to have enough space, and I call that the resilience as well in your cup. So you've got that buffer zone where you've got spare energy in case something else goes wrong in your day, you end up having to work a bit longer. So it's giving yourself that kind of space and capacity that you can add in movement still without ending up with no space at all and having no energy or no capacity for anything else in your day.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Malerie, you got it. You remember? Go on.
Yeah, and I just did a little help for myself and took some notes so I would remember the things. But the first thing was attached to that activity cup. So it's perfect that it circled back around to that. So many friends and family members often ask like, hey, what can I do for you? And in that framework, we just often go without help because we don't know what to say in that moment. And I think it's one way to really monitor that cup and that energy level is to write down the things that are hardest for you. And the next time somebody asks, hey, what can I do for you? You say, hey, I've got a list of things I wrote down in my notes app that are really hard. If there's anything that you can help me with, that would be amazing. And maybe it's getting groceries or doing laundry or whatever it is. I had a friend deliver groceries to my front steps like dozens and dozens of times the year that I was in bed. And that was like the greatest support. When she would go to the grocery store, I'd send her my list and then I'd just Venmo her. And so I think that just really being bold with what is really hard for you, like, because people do want to help and they do want you to have that energy, not to just feel like you are surviving. Like, it's not how you, like, that doesn't feel very good. And your loved ones want to make sure that you have the energy to feel like you're living your life, right? And with Tiffany's comment about just the medical profession and the recommendations for movement and exercise, I mean, how many people are recommended to go to yoga, especially for even just something general like low back pain? And most classes aren't going to be suitable to that because the industry standard right now for yoga style is vinyasa. And that type of flow movement isn't very supportive. And Zoe had mentioned, this was some, I don't remember the exact wording, but something along the lines of, just establishing something that you can consistently come back to. And when I was first starting to kind of just try to move again, when I was frustrated with yoga and didn't really have a place in it yet, I turned to Pilates because it is so just like, it has structure and it's not the flow, and I could do it lying down and I could feel really strong. And when all of my joints were hurting, I would literally just do core work. I'm like, no, I'm not moving my elbows or my knees. I'm not going to be on my hands or my feet. And I would just like, it's funny because I would never want to do anything core related ever before. And then when I was like feeling my worst, I'm like, I love doing core work because it just gave me an energy that I hadn't felt in so long. But I think we need to just state the fact that it is not the person who is sick or disabled. Like, it's not their responsibility to solve all the inaccessibility with movement. Of course, you want to do like what you can do to figure it out for you, but with, you know, doctors thinking that you're not being compliant or whatever it is, that is a fault of the medical industry for recommending something that they actually have no prescription for, basically, and the yoga world for just completely being like ignorant and blind to a, you know, population that is massive and really wants to move and be mindful and just reconnect with their body in some way. And I think that for me, like one of the biggest things is starting, I think it was once I would just play meditations when I was going to sleep. I'd look for like the longest one. I'm like, I'm going to fall asleep. It doesn't matter. I want it to be playing for as long as I'm awake with painsomnia. And I would just put on meditations at night. And it helped me sleep so much faster. Like, it was just the relaxing atmosphere of it. My brain wasn't thinking about all the things like, oh, those test results haven't come back yet. Oh, like this pain's getting worse. This is something I should be worried about. And just doing that can have such a big impact on your mindset. And that's going to impact your motivation to want to do it. You know, when I was like really, really depressed, I got out of that basically by like, I truly feel like the most helpful thing was doing the mindfulness work, and even on a minimal level, doing 5 minutes of just whatever feels good to you to pay attention to listen to. You could listen to like Get Sleepy podcast with like sleep stories and just focus on the words, like just fully trying to listen. And those little things start to impact even like just totally unconsciously how we view things, and our desire to take ownership of our lives and our bodies again, and realizing that
Yeah, you're good.
realizing that if you want to feel different, you're going to have to do something different. And that all starts with your mind, because you can want it, but feel like you don't have any power or control over that. And then you're never going to get it because nobody's going to do it for you, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love how much you're talking about mindfulness, because even when Zoe was saying, you know, finding joy in what you can do and the things that we talked about, you know, how we were speaking about reframing what you used to be able to do and what you're able to do today. And so much of that is mindset, right? So yeah, let's talk a little bit about introducing a mindful practice into your everyday routine. Malerie was suggesting some sleepy time stories. There are some apps out there. Yeah, how do you sort of start to integrate that into your everyday? Zoe, do you have any mindful tips?
Yeah, I think a lot of that being mindful is being like obviously in the present. And that's again why I like movement for that, because I think sometimes when our body is struggling, it can be really hard. We want to almost run away from our bodies a lot of the time, and obviously we can't, but that's often when our brain's trying to go in different places, a distraction. And distraction can be useful at some point, but sometimes there's a point of just sitting with how you are, how you're feeling, how your body is, and that's like that reconnection to yourself and your body. And that's why I like movement, because it's a very can be super mindful. I'm glad Malerie mentioned about Pilates, because obviously that's my more passion area, but I find Pilates super mindful. So sometimes pain is high and I can't settle and I can't feel like meditating because I just get distracted. And there's also certain types of meditation that sometimes I just can't kind of stand. I can't stand body scan sometimes, because that just like highlights to me, like there's some, sometimes you listen to things, you're like, oh my God, I really can't even go there right now. That's when I come back to movement, because I actually find slow, intentional movement helps me reconnect with my breath, helps me reconnect with my body, and helps me kind of ground me again to myself, rather than this feeling of kind of wanting to run away. And I think I've always noticed that, but probably even more so since I've had more struggles with my health. But I remember back in the day when I did do yoga, I'd always, that bit before class started, I'd always remember that I'd get in class and I could never just sit on my mat and wait for class to start or lie down. I'd be like fidgeting, I'd be stretching, I'd be checking my phone, I'd be like, couldn't focus. I'd do the yoga class and end the class and I could be still. And I'd be like, there's the like calmness coming over me. And it's a different level of that, but I use that still now. If I really notice that I just can't settle, my pain's high, I'll just go lie on my mat. I don't have any necessary plan of what I might be doing, but I'll just reconnect to my body, slow down my breath again. And that itself, I find like super mindful, when sometimes the actual just sitting and listening to something perhaps feels out of reach, or I'm not in the place to just go straight into like a mindfulness practice. And also I find when doing everyday tasks about being mindful, so being present with what you're doing, I think often just society and just the way that everything is now, it's everything about being busy and productive and moving on to the next thing. And that's just slowing things down and being like, what am I doing now? And kind of focusing on that particular moment. I find that helpful as well, again, about staying connected to myself, because I think it's quite easy when we're busy and rushing and not thinking about what we're doing to sometimes push our body past what we can cope with, and only realizing perhaps how exhausted we are or how we feel after the moment. Whereas actually the more we stay connected to ourselves in the moment, the more we kind of are able to truly be like, oh, how am I feeling now? Pacing yourself as you go, rather than having that big delayed reaction. So I kind of use my mindful practices most in just everyday things that I'm doing and trying to stay, like I said, connected to myself in that moment.
Yeah, those are great tips. Being connected to the present moment when you're washing dishes. Yeah, all the things. Malerie?
100%. Oh my gosh, when you said the thing about the body scan, I just like, oh my goodness. I remember like, I was like, oh, okay, it was the first time I did a yoga nidra after like my joint pain got really bad. And if you're unfamiliar with yoga nidra, it is translates basically to yogic sleep. It's meditative. You don't move, and you just lie there, and it's a lot about having non-attachment to like desirable or undesirable things. So they'll alternate between like sensations of like, and like trying to physically feel like your body is hot, and then immediately going to cold, and then imagining like a beautiful scene, and then kind of like its counterpart that isn't so beautiful and maybe isn't so great to think about, but just finding that kind of non-attachment. But it's very like structured. There's basically kind of like an outline that it follows, and the body scan is first. And it's just, that is something I feel like so many people would say is one of the most accessible styles of yoga. And that's not accessible. And like, just because something is physically accessible for someone, maybe they can lie there and do that for that amount of time and feel okay. There's so much more to accessibility and movement than that. It's the language, it's like how you're doing things. I had 2 weeks ago where I was having a very difficult time breathing, to like the point I felt like unsafe going to sleep. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do a meditation. And they said one thing about the breath. And I was like, no, like, I can't do this, because it made me feel like I was like, it made me feel even more scared. And so then I was like, okay, so I wish there was like labels for just all of the things that were so much more clear. And I think that that's one way that teachers and studios and anyone who offers movement practices can make it more accessible right this minute. Make a very precise description. Is there standing? Is it seated? Is it lying down? Is it a combination? Is there any type of breath work? Is there a body scan? And just, how long is the standing section of the class versus how long is the laying down section of the class? That makes a huge difference to someone. And so, yes, body scans, do not recommend them if you have pain all over your body. It can be a very overwhelming experience.
Jumping in, Malerie, about the labels for exercise as well, just on that topic, because I think that's a huge barrier to a lot of people for movement. A lot of things are labeled online as beginner, easy, low impact, and they put things in like squats. I mean, I've literally seen low impact classes with like burpees and things. I'm like, this is not beginner friendly. And a lot of people think, especially when they're first coming back to movement with some kind of health issue, that must be the accessible option for me, given it's the beginner version. And it's not. The things they're putting in there are advanced exercises, and then I think people then try that, can't do it, feel rubbish about themselves, feel that it's somehow their failure, which is not at all. It's the class being incorrectly labeled, when actually it was not beginner friendly at all. Like, I would struggle with that. I think that mislabeling is a huge barrier to a lot of people, because they somehow internalize that as their fault, that they're even worse than beginner, and that's not the case. So I don't know what's going on with the fitness industry. That's the current accessible options of that, but definitely labeling is a huge factor.
Gosh, yes. And the standard for beginner in the yoga world is beginner vinyasa. That's a very particular thing. That is not beginner movement. It's a beginner standing flow style. And I am looking at my notes. So we were talking about like bringing mindfulness into the everyday and stuff. And I think that I can't recommend enough listening to meditations as you go to sleep, because there's such a resistance to mindfulness, even to people who know the benefits of it. It's really good for your brain. It's good for your body. It's good to help, kind of desensitize your brain to pain when it just gets extreme, because you feel it all the time. And so it's like you're laying down, you got your eyes closed, you're comfortable, and you're not getting up to go anywhere. I mean, you're like 99% there for meditation. All you have to do is press play and just be there, right? But one thing that I did find that I would self-guide if someone doesn't like listening to something is I would try to basically go from the outer layer of my body to the most inner, and really focus on this level of interoception. Like how deep can you go into your body, almost like just to the level of vibration. There's no other sensation there. It's just your cells vibrating, because that's what they do, even though everything seems so firm and stable. And so that was really for me a super helpful, just basic, not listening to anything form of mindfulness.
That's kind of like TM, like transcendental meditation, where you just focus on going in and in and in. Yeah, those are great suggestions. Trying to find, be present, being present in daily activities and trying to just make your whole sort of living throughout the day a mindful practice. And also, yeah, listening to guided meditations as you're falling to sleep. That's a great way to sort of subconsciously get into the benefit. And again, I think meditation along with exercise is something that you will, if you review, if you look back, like notice a difference in mental health and wellness, as well as like exterior, right? So these always go by so fast. We have 5 minutes left. Does anybody have any recommendations of resources or anything that people can look to sort of start on their own movement journey in this realm?
I will jump in first. So Insight Timer is a free meditation app. There's like so many styles, and they do have more specific filters than any other meditation platform I've seen. So I think that can be really helpful to find something that you might like, and it's free, so that's financially accessible and nice. I did want to mention this book. I haven't finished it yet, but it's so good. I feel like totally fine giving it a little suggestion. It's called The Chronic Pain Couple, and it is about navigating relationships with chronic illness. But one of the things that was so helpful in here is like she talked about setting aside worry time. Like you have 1 hour a week. That's your time to get into the worries. And I literally have been saying to myself, it's not my worry time. And it's been so
I've heard
helpful.
that before.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really useful.
Yes, it is.
That's awesome. I know somebody right now that's sort of advocating online about a worry cleanse, and basically had like set a date for themselves in a month's time. And on that date, they get to have a meeting with themselves and talk about all the worries. But in the same way, it's not my worry time right now. I'm just going to undoubtedly believe in myself this entire month until I have that day to sit down.
I kind of do that with medical staff, to be honest. Sometimes I have moments where if I like got to make phone calls or appointments or think about medical things, I kind of put it in a little category. I'm like, I'm not dealing with that now. I'm dealing with that at this set time. And I find that helps, because otherwise it can just seep into like all areas of your life. Like, so I do that with medical things, definitely, where I kind of categorize and be like, no, that's Monday morning's like time to focus on medical stuff.
Very smart. Yes. Awesome. And did you have any resources you wanted to mention?
Yeah,
I
I've
will
always
link your
liked,
website as well.
in terms of mindfulness stuff or general exercise and movement things?
Yeah, just for anybody that's trying to sort of maybe navigate how to get into this space and start making mindfulness and movement a part of their everyday.
Yeah, so mindfulness wise, I've always liked Headspace, and there's also one called Balance, which is really helpful, and that's, I think, often free for a year as well, the Balance one, so that's quite accessible. Movement wise, there's now so much more, I think, visibility on social media and online of people trying to share ways that are more accessible for exercise than there used to be from when I first kind of joined many years ago now. So there's lots more just ideas and inspiration, and there's a lot more accessible classes. Either there's quite a lot of things about specific conditions that are accessible, and then other things popping up of like just different online classes. I think particularly with the pandemic, it helped really boost a lot of things becoming online, which do make things anyway more accessible for a lot of people with chronic illness disability. So there feels a more varied range of class online. But yeah, myself, I teach bed Pilates, which is all horizontal. You can do it from your bed, and I teach chronic Pilates, which again is a slightly higher level but still very low level form of Pilates, and very much a non-pressure environment that I encourage people to do whatever they can, even if you come and just lie on your mat for half an hour, like that's a win. So that's kind of how I teach, and also do coaching to help people reframe what movement speaks to them and help them build up a sustainable routine like we spoke about today. So that's kind of my passion. But there's loads of now more accessible yoga options, like you said, more than just I feel like it used to be that you for anyone with any kind of pain or disability, it was like, can you wiggle your fingers? And that was the only option for movement, or you did squats. There was like no in between. And now I feel like we're finally opening up this space and seeing this full spectrum, that there are so many options you can do, and so many possibilities of, like you said, playing with movement, exploring what your body can do without it being this really basic, boring option, or this really extreme option. And there's just a lot more around, particularly online.
Yeah, I think the online space for sure has opened up some doors, but I think there are still lots of gaps, and a lot of them were pointed out here today, which is wonderful. I think some really good suggestions for people that are going into a teaching in the fitness space to think about. Is this truly accessible? Could I describe this class in more detail so that people in my class really know what they're getting into? Yeah, I think a lot of really great things that we covered. I could talk to you for another hour easily. Perhaps we'll do it again. But thank you so much to Zoe and Malerie for being here. Tiffany, thanks for joining. And I have copied and pasted all of the resources mentioned in the chat, and I will upload them to our website soon. And this will stay live on Facebook and YouTube, so you can feel free to share it with your communities as well. I will email you, Malerie and Zoe, with the link to that.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much for being here. Yes,
Thank
and sharing your
you.
stories. Have a great